Carry On Only, dedicated to inspiring your next global adventure. And now, here's your host and personal guide, award-winning photographer, creative director, and travel expert, taking you around the world in style, Jill Pater.
I am your host, Kevin, along with Sam. Sam, how's it going today?
You know, it's going so well. I'm so excited for our next destination.
Do you know where we're going?
I do.
Do you?
I'll let you have the honor.
Today we're going to go to Tanzania.
Yes.
Do you know where Tanzania is?
You know, I feel like this is a question for our travel expert.
As always, with us is Jill Pater. Jill, how's it going today?
It's going great, thanks.
Jill is our travel expert. So, Jill, today we are going to Tanzania. I don't really know where Tanzania is. So, do you mind telling us where it is first?
Sure. It's in East Africa.
East Africa. All right. So we did go with you a few times through Africa already on previous podcasts. Now, what is the difference between fuck?
Yeah. Vincent, could I have you not do that?
What?
Could I have you not record the...
Oh, I was just going to take a picture.
Okay.
But...
Does it distract you?
Yeah. It just makes me self-conscious.
All right, let's run it back. Okay. Good. So we weren't even a minute in, so we're good.
Yeah, we were hardly.
That's all the good shit. All right.
Good shit.
All the good shit to go. Okay, here we go. We're good?
Yeah.
All right. And welcome back to Travel in Style. I am your host, Kevin, along with Sam. Sam, how's it going today?
It's going so well.
Yeah?
Thank
Anything
you.
new? Anything great?
I'm just very excited for our next destination. Yeah.
Okay, so today, Sam, we're going to Tanzania.
I've always wanted to go there.
All right, but guess who we're going to go with? I feel like you know.
Wait, do I?
Do you?
Jill Pater.
We're going with Jill Pater, our travel expert. Jill, thank you for being with us again today.
It's great to be here.
Okay, so Tanzania, right? I don't know where it is. Can you start by explaining to us where Tanzania is?
Sure. Tanzania is in East Africa.
East Africa. Okay, so prior to this episode, we went to Namibia. How does Tanzania compare?
So Tanzania we were in South Africa
right.
And then Namibia. Tanzania being in East Africa is just it's quite different topography.
Okay.
And Tanzanians would say Tanzania is kind of the real Africa. If you tell them you've been to South Africa, they would consider Tanzania that not being Africa.
Right.
They think Tanzania East Africa is the real Africa. It's a little bit different topography-wise. Namibia was obviously very kind of desert-driven. Tanzania is a bit more lush, I would say. Definitely more lush when you think of your typical African safari photos of elephants and the animals and things. We usually see them coming kind of probably, I'd say, more from this part of Africa than the southern part.
Sure. So what's it like? You mentioned safari, right? So is there, what's it like to be on safari? But then two, is there a big difference between safari in Tanzania versus Namibia?
Yes, very big difference. In terms of the actual packing for the trip
right.
and, what you're doing day to day, that is pretty similar. But in terms of what you see, it's actually quite different. Just the topography, the terrain is very different, and the culture is very different, among these three countries that we're talking about. So in Tanzania, a lot of people go there. It's kind of a safari haven. There's many places to visit. On this particular trip, we did Arusha National Park, the Ngorongoro Crater, Lake Manyara, and of course the Serengeti National Park. Right. So it's just kind of a safari feast, if you will.
So you mentioned culture. So what are kind of the big differences in culture between different countries in Africa, and how does that kind of differ?
Well, Africa, having been colonized by Europeans, the lines drawn between countries are somewhat sporadic,
right.
And so you have a lot of different traditional tribal cultures, and you have, kind of European descendants in all these places. South Africa has, I would say, more of a mix of culture because you have a lot more, you have a mix of Europeans, you have a mix of Africans who've been on the continent a long time and indigenous cultures. Tanzania is a little bit more, they say it's probably real Africa because it's more, more
authentic?
People have settled. I would say authentic, but people have settled
Sure.
settled there for quite some time.
I was actually wondering about that, like the country's, tradition. How does how does a culture stay traditionally driven when it has, kind of welcomed tourists within it? So did you experience a lot of people that are, let's say in traditional garb or like, doing traditional things? Like, and how do you like experiencing that part of it?
Yeah,
of any country too.
Yeah, in Tanzania, in certain part, and certainly in Africa, we see this a lot in travel documentary. Sometimes they kind of put culture on for sale, and so local people are extremely friendly and welcoming. But it has become in certain parts, and I would say to some extent, Tanzania being one of them, where it's almost a concern. It's like they're kind of put on display for tourism.
Yeah, and that's what drives me insane. I'm trying to.
Yeah. So it's definitely there, and there are certainly authentic experiences to be had. But I think it's just, important to kind of ask your guides and ask locals, like, what are things to do that would really be kind of authentic experiences with people versus like the more touristy, excursions, which I don't think you kind of gain as much insight from.
Right.
Sure. And so not really knowing the size of Tanzania, is there, quickly, can you compare it to just a U.S. city? Is it as big as L.A.? I'm just trying to get, because I'm wondering, where all you traveled in Tanzania. And is it easy to get around? Is it all like safari feel? Is it?
Yeah, so the country is it's very plush with national parks. I wouldn't say they have major cities as well. So it would compare to a very large U.S. state, right. I would say, the size of the country.
Okay. And then while is going on safari kind of the main thing you do there? Is there, I don't know, we've talked a lot about, some of the different cities, countries you've been to. There's museums, there's architecture. There is, like, is this really kind of true Africa, or is it, are there other things to do while you're in Tanzania?
So the main driver, I would say, for tourism into Tanzania is safari, are these adventure type trips. Kilimanjaro is also there. That's a big drive for climbers. So you kind of have that mixed with safari. I would say that most tourists are going there for that experience. It's to see the national parks and the animals and kind of integrate to the extent they can with local culture, for sure.
Was there, for Tanzania in particular, did you go, and I feel like we ask you this every time, and it's really work and pleasure together. What were you specifically shooting?
So there I was shooting for a book called, appropriately, African Safari.
That makes sense.
And shooting, the safari lodges. We went all around the country. We took small aircraft in between lodges, that's shot
great.
That experience. Yeah. The terrain from above, the lodges, the food, exactly kind of what we're talking about, the safari lifestyle, what it's like.
Any wildlife?
Yeah, as a part of it, definitely part of the landscape.
That's
for sure.
Amazing. So this is like National Geographic type stuff.
Yes, ask
Right.
In book form. How do you say? I know you kind of talked about this. So is the big difference between the safari in like Namibia to Tanzania is like Namibia is more desert, Tanzania is a little bit more like green and plush. What would you say was your favorite between the two as far as safari?
That's tough, especially between Namibia and Tanzania, because the terrain is so different. They're on very different parts of the continent, like literally thousands of miles apart. So it's really hard to compare them.
What's your
My personal preference, I prefer the Southern Hemisphere for pretty much everything.
Yeah.
Everything. I did love Tanzania, though. It's not without saying they're just very different parts of the continent.
Yeah.
It's almost like saying, what did you prefer, Canada or Mexico? You know what I mean? They're
totally
just
different.
their own parts.
So when you were, you've been to a couple different places in parts of Africa. How are you choosing those? Is it strictly based off of work? Is it, I really want to do a safari, I'm going to go to this country?
Yeah, for this particular one, I had pitched a company called And Beyond to do some social media work and this book on African safaris. So it was very pointed at doing a safari. And East Africa, I think, usually for a lot of tourists is the first point of, their first safari experience tends to be there. So either Kenya or Tanzania.
And that's the crazy thing about, Africa is so massive.
So
big. You can really, explore and experience so many different cultures. And there's Egypt, there's pyramids, there's the jungle, the desert. So it's wild. So is Tanzania, would you recommend it? Would you go back? Is it kind of like, I've done it once, I'm good?
I would say for me, we had a pretty amazing experience, again, because we were shooting this book and we were doing it specifically on this full experience. So we had a pretty full experience while we were there. I wouldn't say that I wouldn't go back. There are parts of Tanzania that I haven't been to that I'd love, to still love to go to. So you would go back to those places, but I wouldn't do this particular itinerary again just because there's so much to see. And African travel is a little bit harder in that it's more expensive, right? There are longer flights. There's less availability of those flights, generally speaking, so the cost is higher. And then a safari trip tends to be a little bit more expensive as well because it's all inclusive, like your food, everything is taken care of by the lodge.
Yeah.
And that's just a different style of travel. Like the lodges we stayed in might host like 20 to 30 people. So you think of the overhead that would take to create, and there's a cost associated with that. And then the in-country transportation is also quite high because you're going from one place to the other. You might be flying in small aircraft.
You guys didn't rent a gold Toyota this time?
No, this time. No, this time we lived large. We were in small aircraft flying from place to place.
Right.
But even still, like you doing these game drives and stuff, the roads are pretty rough and it's rougher travel. So I would definitely go back to Tanzania, but I wouldn't do this exact safari experience again.
Yeah.
Just because
Was there any safety concerns? I mean, whether it was from the people or from wildlife? Afraid of getting eaten by a lion? Or anything?
Hippo, maybe.
No, I would say definitely not safety in terms of any safety issues in terms of people, but the wildlife, if you haven't been on safari before, you haven't stayed at these lodges, they do in some of the locations, particularly where we were in the Serengeti, you don't leave your lodge at night without calling somebody. And same thing with like Manyara. Like if you go to bed at night, your walk to your cabin.
That's why. Do they have a rifle or to protect you from the wildlife?
They're more kind of spotting.
Yeah.
Because they know they're familiar with the land. They're very
Cautious.
just experts on that area. And so if there were an animal, because you're in a national park, I mean,
so
even though it's at a lodge, there are animals all around and wandering. And it's rare that they're going to come up to you in that particular instance, but like in case they did, you wouldn't really know how to.
Have you experienced on any of your safaris where animals have maybe gotten a little close for comfort?
Yeah, we had what was funny in the Serengeti. We had these little tents, and of course they have like these these little jars of like candy and stuff like that are closed. And so when we got back in, I went back in to grab something, and all the jars, and they were like twist off jars, they were all open, and like the nuts or whatever, and then we're all spread out all over the floor, and it was just really weird because the glass was broken, and these things were like all over the room, and I'm like, what? So I went and called. I'm like, were we robbed? What happened? And they're, so I went and told the manager, I'm like, I think, and he's like, oh, the monkeys. So the monkeys, like they crawled
the monkeys
off.
again.
Yeah, they came in.
Insane.
They broke through the screen. They got through like a little portion of the screen, and then they came in and they like got on top of the desk where these jars were, under the jars.
Oh my goodness.
Had a little party in the room and then left. And so it's
because you're like, did we get robbed? And it's like, yes, of candy.
Yes,
by monkeys.
Yeah, by monkeys.
Exactly.
You don't see that, everywhere you go.
No, you can't. So for somebody that like a first timer that is interested, like say like myself, is interested, but maybe could be naive to some of these like things, how long would you recommend someone staying, and what time of the year would be best to experience, maybe not on the same level like what you did, but just still overall see everything that you need to see when you go to Tanzania?
So Tanzania being so loaded with national parks and things, there's so much to do and see that you probably can't kind of get it all in, I would say, on one trip unless you spend a great deal of time there. I would say for the average traveler, that's just not going to be a reality. And then the other thing you want to keep in mind is the different parks and things all have different like high seasons. So the migration of animals happens at different points in time during the year in different parks. So the big one that everyone goes to usually is August, July and August.
Okay.
That's the big migration that people, when you see all of the animals kind of running in the Serengeti, that's kind of one. But again, the park is so massive, and the Serengeti runs into the Masai Mara in Kenya. It's actually kind of the same park. They just call it something different. And so those animals are at different places at different points of time. So you can see migration at different points of the year. So that's one thing that a lot of people consider in going to see there. It used to be that when you'd go to Africa, you definitely want to book in time because the flights are so long. But now a lot of people are actually doing kind of these shorter safaris, like 5 to 7 days. I still think that's a little
it's too short.
Shy.
Yeah.
So I recommend definitely 2 weeks while you're there because, sometimes it's a thing where you're not going to go back to this place again.
For a long while,
so you might as well kind of like book it into the.
Is there anything to do other than just the safari? You know, I guess, is there any type of, you know, without having obviously been to Tanzania, you know, is there any other type of settings or sceneries, or, you know, are you kind of there just for the safari?
Yeah, you're pretty much there for just the safari. And the cool thing about Tanzania is these places that I've talked about, the Ngorongoro Crater, like Manyara, they're very different topographies within the country. So you'd say go to one for like 3 or 4 days and then another for 3 or 4 days. And while you're there, you do pretty extensive game drives in Tanzania. That's another big difference. In Namibia and South Africa, you tend to wake up in the morning, do a 5 a.m. drive, you know, for a couple hours and then come back. And then maybe an evening drive. But in Tanzania, like they'll do drives almost all day if you want to, or for like 4 or 5 hours. So there's just kind of more terrain to cover, and it's a little bit rougher. So that's pretty much what you're doing. I mean, it's you wake up in the morning, you have breakfast, you're out on these different game drives all day. They'll bring, depending on the level of safari you're on, they'll bring out cocktails and lunch and, you know, do different things. But it's very much about being in the wild, being in the wilderness. A lot of the lodges have, you know, amazing food and wine. So that's kind of that's like the evening activity as everyone comes back, has their sundowner drinks, has dinner, and then goes to bed and gets up relatively early because to go to the
That's what a sundowner drink.
Sundowner is
that.
cocktail hour.
I need some sundowner drinks.
Sundowners,
Well, it's you know, as you're saying this, say you could possibly just be out all day. What are some things you kind of bring with you when you're out all day? So bug repellent. I mean, do you have like certain things to kind of prepare you to be out in the wild all day?
Yeah, and definitely on safaris, you want to make sure and get a list from the lodges because depending on where you are, there's certain things, you know, certain colors attract certain bugs. So you just kind of want.
Did not know that. That's good to know.
You kind of want to know like exactly what you should bring, and they're very good at like coming up with that list. So definitely bug repellent and sunscreen. The bugs, particularly in the Serengeti, can be quite bad. I mean, they'll come and get you.
Do you have a favorite bug repellent?
I don't.
You're just like,
oftentimes,
off.
Yeah, exactly. The lodges will have the right ones.
Okay.
And so I'd bring something just to have it in your travel bag, but usually the lodges will have the right one, you know, for that particular area. But yeah, so the packing, the right color of clothes, you know, knowing what to bring. You usually want in safari, even when it's really hot, a longer sleeve shirt, like but of light cotton, just again so that you don't get bitten. Definitely medications. These are more remote places that you're going to, and oftentimes the lodges will have like kind of the staff pharmacist or the resident person who does things. But you know, people will sometimes bring anti-malarials. They'll bring all different medicines. They'll get prescriptions from their doctor to go just in case you get sick while you're there because it's a pretty far trek out.
You have to get shots in the U.S. before going to Africa,
you
right?
don't.
Or you don't?
You don't. Not to Tanzania.
Okay.
I mean, some people do, but we did not for this trip.
Right. That actually just made me think of we know when we talk to you about going to these different cities and you experience all these different cultures and different people, you just mentioned something that made me think, like, is it kind of like a culture shock or just so different or bizarre when you see all this like exotic wildlife and bugs and things that you would never see in, you know, LA or America.
In your backyard.
Because
we don't have bugs in LA.
We do, but like different species of things that you probably would never even have seen before, because that just...
It is pretty crazy, especially your first time on safari, and certainly to this part of Africa, because just the level, the mass migration of animals is something unlike you've ever seen before. I mean, there's nothing that can kind of prepare you for that. So it's pretty wild, no pun intended, to see that and to experience that and to be out with guides who live and breathe this lifestyle and know so much about the animals, so much about the terrain, their history, their culture. And on the trip we were on, we had just amazing guides who grew up, you know, this is their environment. They grew up in it and kind of know everything about these animals, know how to spot them, know their habits. And so it's such an education. I mean, it really is like the science lesson you always want to some extent.
Because you're not only meeting just new people, but I'm sure that's just, you're seeing so many different sights and wildlife and creatures.
Yeah.
And
You're
And
just
the
like,
guides
I've never
are
seen
just-
that spider before.
Right.
Like, what
it has
is
so many legs.
right?
The guides are just so knowledgeable. One of the great things about being on these drives all day is that you learn so much from them. You learn about their families, their lifestyles, what they do.
Yeah.
Obviously the animals and the countryside, but just their life and their perspective on things is so fascinating.
I'm so just It's so wild to me how you have like your travels really span like so many different cultures and locations, right? So you're in London, you're in, Berlin, you're in very metropolis, places, and then you go on these,
More
safaris
remote.
and
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
So I'm sure like it's just the things you've seen, I'm sure are quite crazy.
I feel like is that kind of what makes your trip? Yes, yes, you do, you're on assignment and then you're doing all the touristy stuff. But when you meet, say, like the locals and you kind of get to know them, you feel that
human
attachment. Yeah. Like, does that kind of make you, kind of just make that even more memorable, that place even more memorable?
Absolutely. I think anytime you have those people to people connections,
Yeah.
like that's your strongest point. It's always your strongest memory of any place. It's
the
It's just
connection.
the connection for
Right.
sure.
Super jealous, and
I'm very jealous.
thank you for that. You did talk about your garb for dressing in safari wear in Namibia and Tanzania is somewhat alike. But since we're now going on to Jill's packing hack, what is important to just kind of bring with you on any trip, no matter if it is safari, tropical, city-like? What is something that is particular that always stays in your carry-on besides denim?
Sure.
Yeah.
Besides denim. I would say one of the things I think most people, and I certainly was one of them, kind of underestimate is the importance of outerwear. So your jackets, I usually have like one that you're wearing on the plane, and then maybe something that's lighter. That could be just a lightweight jacket if you're going out at night. But the importance of light outerwear, because if you think about it, when you're traveling, you're out and about most of the day, you're usually in something like that. So having something that you love and you're comfortable in and you feel kind of stylish in.
You feel good.
Yeah,
you're
feel
traveling
good
in style.
Yeah, I think that's a great investment for a trip. A lot of times we think about, what we need to wear every single day and all these different outfits. But when you're out and about, you're always in that jacket or you're always in that. And so having a great piece that you love, that's
Right.
comfortable and, and kind of stylish, right? Because that's one of the mainstays you're wearing for, the 12 days or however long you're gone for. So I say invest in outerwear.
Where it is.
Right. Convinced.
Well, Jill, that is all the time we have for today. But thank you so much again for being with us. This is our last podcast for some time, so we appreciate the time and taking us on these great journeys through all these different locations. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Carry on only.
Thanks for listening to Carry On Only, dedicated to inspiring your next global adventure. Listen to Jill take you around the world in style, live every week right here or 24/7 on demand at starworldwidenetworks.com. Please remember to like, subscribe, and share. For immediate access to Jill's destination guides, blog, and show notes, please visit jillpater.com and follow her on Instagram at Jill Pater.